this generation is irresponsible and will quit before they ask for a raise. I don't like the conversation of strengths and weaknesses. It's the famous question, in an interview, what's your biggest weakness? Well, I'm a perfectionist, I don't like the conversations of strengths and weaknesses because strengths often have liability. I'm really confident. Okay, in the wrong context, you're arrogant, right? But weaknesses also have silver linings. So for me, I'm chronically disorganized. I'm terrible, right? Every system app works for like a week and then I'm back to being disorganized. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, for years, I used to beat myself up for it and say it's a bad thing. It's a terrible weakness. But the reality is, it's context. So I was as a young entrepreneur, I was at this networking event, and I met this guy who was like really impressed with what I had to say with my pitch. And he's like, Simon, we have to do work together. Here's my business card. Call me. Let's do this. And I lost the business card basically as soon as he gave it to me. So anybody who was organized would be sending a text from the taxi or at least sending an email the next day. Not Yahoo over here. I lost the business card. There was no way for me to find out what this important piece of business would have led to because I lost the card. 2 weeks later, I found the business card at the bottom of a briefcase. So I emailed him and said, hey, do you remember we met 2 weeks ago? I'd love to reconnect and see if we can work together still. He wanted to work with me more because he thought I was busy. So strength or weakness? The answer is it depends. Now, in general, yes, it's important for us to understand our characteristics that we exhibit, of which some of them in certain contexts are huge strengths, and some of the exact same characteristics in the wrong context are huge weaknesses, right? So we have to be very careful when we label people or generations as being strong or weak, because the answer is it depends. Okay, so that's the preface. So when we talk about this young generation, the Gen Z generation, they exhibit many of the same characteristics as the previous generation, but they're quite different in the sense that they're very activist, right? So, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, people hated their jobs back then too. They just went to work every day and just suffered in silence. By the time you get to the 80s and 90s, people hated their jobs, but then they'd at least start talking about it around the office, saying, this job kind of sucks a little bit, And then by the time you get sort of the 2000s, people start speaking up to their bosses, saying, I think we should make it better to work here, And now you're in this young generation, and they're just like, standing up and quitting and I love it, right? And they organize. They're much more, the previous generation would hashtag tweet my discontent as I'm sitting in my Uber on my way to brunch, but this young generation gets out and organizes and comes together. Plus or minus, depends. Sometimes it's a huge strength, the fact that they have that kind of energy. But sometimes, as we've talked about as well, they also have the energy to quit instead of having an uncomfortable conversation. So strength or weakness, it depends. And so I think the way we have to approach all of these things is with empathy, which is instead of deciding if it's a strength or weakness, to try and understand where it comes from. Because I can say this generation is irresponsible and will quit before they ask for a raise, or I can say, why is it that they're quitting before they when they just need a raise? What happened between A and B in that thought, in those two actions? And I'm like, oh, they just missed the skill set. Oh, we can totally figure that one out. That one's an easy fix. So I'm not labeling a whole person or a whole generation. I'm not rather recognizing that there's gaps of skills, which we all have. So when you ask me about any of the generations, and they all have strengths and they all have liabilities. And depending on the time frame and the context, sometimes those strengths also become old-fashioned, no longer necessary. I think the trial, the test, is the practice of empathy, which is another skill that we can